The second factor that I want to highlight that was highly determinative of our native human inference and decision-making capacities is the history of hominini evolution. That is the evolution of humans and proto-humans. And this graphic from Wood and Baker's 2011 paper really kind of brings some of that into relief. So when we look at Homo sapiens here, anatomically modern humans have only been around for about 200,000 years. But if we look at the history of evolution, including proto-humans, that is, members of the hominini evolutionary category, so they are not considered to be apes, they're considered to be proto-humans, that dates back, depending on the researcher that you want to cite, either about 4.4 million years to 7 million years. So a much longer time period. So anatomically modern humans really haven't been around for very long, and they haven't had a chance to really evolve specifically as a particular species that much. But when we look at the history of hominini evolution, of all the different sorts of proto-humans as well as anatomically modern humans, that time period becomes significantly larger. And some of the features that we see, both of the environment and of the sorts of problems that these humans and proto-humans were trying to solve, these things seem to have been strongly determinative of the sorts of native inference and decision-making strategies that we see anatomically modern humans manifesting. So the basic capacities and innate dispositions that drive human inference, they probably evolved during this period of 4.4 to 7 million years of human and proto-human evolution. And almost that entire time, up and really until about 10,000 or 12,000 years ago, humans and proto-humans lived a hunter-gatherer existence. Only when we see the introduction of the Neolithic era, where there's an introduction of agriculture and of herding, domestication of animals, only then do we see a significant change in the way in which humans and proto-humans lived. So a very small slice of that 4.4 to 7 million years. So when we think about what it is that drove the evolution of human inference and decision-making capacities, it's this very long period of hunter-gatherer existence. And what do we know about that period? Hunter-gatherers live pretty short lives. Estimates usually range from around 26 to 37 years of an average lifespan. They didn't, generally speaking, live to the age of 45 very often. They had very few tools or other artifacts for almost this entire period. Only until around 50,000 years ago do we even see things like the use of pigmentation for purposes of body decoration. Do we see things like cave paintings? Do we see things like jewelry and so on? They have little technological and social development. So for most of this period, hunter-gatherers had primitive stone tools. They live in relatively small groups, and they're relatively isolated from most other humans and proto-humans. And this is an important point, right? The population of humans and proto-humans was really relatively small. Up until the Neolithic period, human beings were a relatively small number of creatures on the planet. And in fact, they almost went extinct twice. The last time dropping down to maybe around 10,000, about 70,000 years ago. So these facts really help shape the environment in which hunter-gatherers solve problems, as well as the sorts of problems that they actually solve. And so when we think about the environment in which the vast majority of these humans and proto-humans solved problems and made decisions, what we see is that that environment was relatively small. So they only have walking as a means of transportation. There were no domesticated animals until much later on. And so most of them didn't travel much farther than 30 miles from the place of their birth. So we have this relatively small territory in which they live. They live for a very short time. And though there are things that happen, environmental and geological occurrences, during a particular human or proto-human's lifetime of, maybe 37 or 40 years, not a lot happens on a geological or environmental scale. So there are ice ages and so on, but these ice ages occur in a much longer time frame than an individual hunter-gatherer's life. And because their environment is relatively small, because it's relatively stable, if you stick a pin in a map anywhere on the planet and you just draw a 30-mile circle around it, you'll find that that environment's relatively homogeneous. That is, it doesn't change a lot from one place to the next within that very small area over that very small period of time. So we have a relatively small, relatively stable, and relatively homogeneous environment, which is the environment in which most humans and proto-humans solved problems and made decisions for about 4.4 or 7 million years, up until the Neolithic era. Now, given the nature of their existence as hunter-gatherers, they have a hand-to-mouth existence where it takes about 1,000 calories to generate about 1,000 calories. And since their environment remains stable and relatively homogeneous during their lifetimes, their inferences are largely going to be reactions to specific problems at hand. That is, their inferences need to work for the specific content, the things that they're trying to solve this problem about, and the context, the way in which the problem is presented to them in this situation. Hunter-gatherer problem solving, therefore, is going to be largely reactive, relatively simple, concrete problem solving that's linked to specific content, specific problem instances, and specific context, specific situations.